Tim, the council is based in DC?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah, our headquarters is here, but we're coast to coast.
Okay.
We're live. We're live.
We're live. Okay. All right, Angela, can I go ahead and start? Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being with us tonight. My name is Tori Parrish. I'm the NABJ Region I Director. I'm glad everyone could join us tonight. We are having a panel discussion, a webinar titled Doing the Most, How NABJ Chapters Can Maximize Productivity When Help Falls Short. And this was brought about because several chapters had told me they were having a hard time getting volunteers to carry out projects, having a hard time getting people to run for office. So I have 3 experts on tonight who are going to offer some tips, and hopefully we can share best practices. First, we have Benet Wilson, president of the Baltimore Association of Black Journalists, and the credit cards editor and a travel aviation writer for The Points Guy. She's worked for myriad aviation trade publications and serves on the boards of the Online News Association and Mercer University's Center for Collaborative Journalism. Next, we have Tim Delaney. He's president and CEO of the National Council of Nonprofits. He's a seasoned attorney who has successfully argued in the U.S. Supreme Court and applies his leadership experience to help charitable nonprofits identify emerging trends. We also have Kevin Hirams, who is president of the Charlotte Area Association of Black Journalists. He's also the managing director of Sideroll Branding, a division of Sideroll Global LLC, a brand management and innovation consulting firm. So we're going to jump right into it because we only have an hour. I'm not going to waste a lot of time. If you would like to ask a question, because there are 25 people registered for this, more might come on. If you want to ask a question, you can go, if you hover over the bottom of your screen, you'll see chat. You can ask your question there, type your question, and I'll ask it to the panelists. Everyone can see when you ask that question. If you want to ask it anonymously, type in see if you hover at the bottom, you'll see Q&A. If you type your question there, I can ask it, but again, that'll be an anonymous question. Because there are 25 people, we can't have everyone on the screen, so the attendees will be typing their questions. So the first question I'm going to get into is how and where do you recruit volunteers? So Benet, how do you recruit volunteers?
You guys are going to hear the name Nikki Mayo a lot tonight because our chapter was one that was on the brink of actually just going away in 2013. We are one of 3 chapters that predate NABJ, and our chapter was founded by NABJ founder Dwayne Wickham. So Nikki is from Baltimore, so she knows a lot of people, and she's a journalist. So she just started networking, and we all just kind of pulled together, and we got not only the broadcasters, but print and our communicators. And we just put the word out that we were bringing the chapter back, rebranded, renamed it, and people just started coming.
Thank you. Kevin, how do you recruit people? How do you recruit volunteers? Kevin, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Should be good. In essence, we take a very personal approach to recruiting volunteers. I ask individuals to network within their workplace, be very open about getting people engaged in the numerous events that we would have. Once we get to that point, I know since I've been in the leadership role, I will make phone calls, I will text, and I just try to just really reach out and let people know that they're welcome. And I feel I've had good success by just making sure not only do I touch them, but within the workplace and then other people, whether they're on the executive committee or people that are actually strong volunteers within the chapter, will reach out. So we really try to create a sense of community, and that's been successful for us.
Thank you. Tim, is it ever okay to turn down help, even if you're shorthanded? Is it ever okay if you feel like maybe that person might not come through or it might not be a good fit? Is it ever okay to turn down help even when you're short-staffed?
Yes, I believe that it is. Even when you are in need of people, if someone is going to be a disruptor, you know that that the task at hand is not going to be a match. You really don't want to have people who are creating problems for others and perhaps driving existing members away. But you really don't want to presume that people will be disruptors unless you have personal experience. And if you're concerned, then give those people an opportunity to serve more behind the scenes and do something so that you're using them, kind of test driving to see if they're ready for even greater exposure.
Okay, thank you.
And if I might, Tori, just going back to the other question, well, one of the ways that to try to help recruit people is to first have someone on the board responsible for it. Certainly have everyone on the board be aware of it and the officers, but have one of the officers be in charge of making sure that you're bringing people in, and have them put together a small committee to be helping to bring people in and sell them on both the mission so that they feel involved, but also while you're feeding their mind and their heart. One way that I've seen successful is to feed their stomach at the same time, and have some sort of a recruiting event where you bring people together and they're socializing, and they go, wow, this could be fun to do even more.
Yeah, show them the fun side of the chapter. Some chapters have membership committee chairs that work on that as well. My former chapter in Pittsburgh has that. Thank you, Tim. But now you said something interesting one time, a couple months ago, when I was asking you about people proposing programs. And you said, when someone comes and proposes a program, your response is what?
My
Do you remember that conversation?
is, if you want to do that program, then you should head it up. People tend to have a lot of great ideas, but then when you say, okay, well, what are you going to do? Then all of a sudden, it's like they disappear.
Mm-hmm.
So we put the onus on people. And we have this other saying I got from my friend Doug Mitchell. We kind of voluntold people. Instead of volunteer, you're voluntold.
Mm-hmm.
So, and Kevin brought up a good, Tim brought up a good point. We have food at every chapter meeting. People like food. It's also important to be consistent, have meetings on the same day of the month, have strong programming, get input from your members on the programming they want. And we have a membership chair, and we also have a contest. The person who brings in the most members gets a prize.
Oh, that's a great idea. Thank you. Recently, I was talking to some chapters, and they're having elections, and they had a hard time getting people to run for office. And my thought was one of the reasons is because they have too many positions. They have president, vice president print, vice president broadcast, vice president of digital, and then your parliamentarian, treasurer, and secretary. And my thought was, if you have a hard enough time getting people to run for office, revamp your bylaws and just have the 5 basic offices. And then if you need help, create a committee. Make someone a chair of someone so for a specific program, instead of having a huge board when you can't get anyone to run for office. And sometimes if you just make someone a chair of a particular event, they're more likely to participate because it's not as much responsibility for them. What are your thoughts on that? And have you had experience with that? Anybody? Kevin?
We actually cut our board down because we had all of those too. So we have president, vice president, secretary, treasurer. We also have what we call our boomer outreach. And then we have someone who he's not a student anymore, but he's close enough. So he's our board member for younger people outreach.
Okay.
Yeah, in our chapter, we did the same thing. Our bylaws were amended so that the positions were not eliminated, but it's mandatory. It's no longer mandatory that they all had to be filled. And clearly, if we had to take the priority, I try to make sure we always have a strong treasurer because we're always dealing with funds. And then the president's role, of course, needs to be filled, and the vice presidents can fluctuate. And some of that is also indicative of our market and the transient nature.
Exactly. And treasurer, a lot of people think the treasurer is the most important position in the chapter, more so than the president. Money's important.
Yep.
For all of you who have joined late, we're taking written questions. If you hover at the bottom of your screen, hover your mouse, you'll see chat. You can ask your question there, type your question, and I'll ask it of the panelist. Also, you could go to Q&A. If you type your question into Q&A, that's an anonymous question. I'll ask it of the panelist as well. I also wanted to talk to you about what happens when you have a volunteer or a board member who doesn't deliver. Tim, can you talk about how a chapter should handle that? You have someone who is going to run a program, initiated a program, and they don't deliver. How do you handle that?
Thank profusely and replace. Having someone who's not producing can actually spread ill will elsewhere. And you want everybody to know that the organization is positive and moving forward and following through. And that's the time to then pull a couple people together to see who's going to follow through, who will then accept those responsibilities, thank the person, and replace and keep moving. And try to make sure that it's done gracefully, because you never know when this person is going to have more time in their life and they want to give more, do something different.
Okay, thank you. Kevin, Benet, what are your thoughts? And have you had to do that? Have you had to replace someone who wasn't delivering? Even I did as a president of a chapter. Have you had to replace someone on your board?
The short for me, the answer is yes, we've had to, but I've tried to not put ourselves in a situation where the failure is catastrophic for our situation. So if I try to build in a redundancy or co-chair scenarios, especially early, typically you get an early indication if someone's gonna fail or not deliver. If it's something small, then we use it as a test case, but there's a level of scrutiny we try to practice, you know, when we have a new volunteer, just so we don't disappoint our audience and members and clients. So that's one of the things, but we've had to politely excuse someone and really convince them or try to convince them to kind of self-select if at all possible.
Did they easily step aside or was it a tussle?
It's a little bit of both, but we've never had to strong arm anyone out. I think if it's fact-based, we try to get to why the scenarios were the way they were. And then they kind of said, well, give me another shot. And then after that, then it was pretty clear. Okay. So that's what we had to do.
Thank you. What about you, Benet?
Yeah, I think Kevin and Tim covered it.
Okay. Okay. Next up, Johnny, someone asked the question, should your committee chairs be elected or appointed? Recently, our bylaws were amended for them to be elected. So that depends on the bylaws. In my chapter, previous chapter in Pittsburgh, the officers were elected, the committee chairs were appointed by the president, but I always got board members' input, and I had the committee people applying to be committee chairs fill out an application, and I always discussed that with the board, but I didn't have to. That's the way it worked. What about you, Benet?
No, we don't have committee chairs who are elected. We don't really have, I mean, we have the membership chair, but we don't have committees per se. Mm-hmm. We just kind of work things on an event by event basis.
Okay, thank you. Kevin?
Similar, the executive board is elected. Committees are appointed with a slight caveat. If it's a contested position, which does not happen often, then we will bring it to a vote, but it's not mandatory. But typically they're not contested, you know, subcommittee or committee positions, so that we don't have to deal with that often.
Thank you.
And that goes back to the earlier issue of the bylaws and who might be available to do things, and trying to narrow down the number of people who are elected, such as the officers, and then having the flexibility to tap into your proven winners to be the chairs of the committees. And then we see it throughout our network across the country with nonprofits of having too many open positions, and so nonprofits are trying to narrow the number of people in their bylaws who need to be elected or officers, and then also squeeze down the number of standing committees that you might have but then that gives you the flexibility to appoint more task forces or one-year committees or whatever, so that people who want to be energized, engaged, have a platform, but you're not always running around not living up to your bylaws. So shortening the bylaw spread in terms of the number of elected people then gives you the flexibility to do the other work.
Okay, thank you. Someone, an audience member asked the question, is it okay to have non-journalists in leadership roles? So for those who don't know, NABJ, the national organization, requires the president and vice president of a chapter to be either full-time journalists or get the majority of their income from journalism. That's for president and vice president. The other officers can be full or part-time journalists, journalism professors, and then PR. What's your makeup and your chapter, Kevin?
Well, first, we did the amendment in the bylaws to allow it, but it pretty much reflects what has been requested from NABJ National. But I'll even say that down here, not just PR, but we have individuals that have significant marketing roles that may not be quote unquote classified as PR, and they've been members of the organization and have held leadership roles. But it started with the amendment of the bylaws to do what Tim had said and what Benet said, to give us the flexibility to do what we need to do, not just for survival, but to excel.
And that's a challenge in these chapters. A lot of times it's people who are not journalists who are stepping up to the plate. So that's a challenge. Do you turn people away because they're not at a newsroom or at a newspaper? If they're willing to do the work, that's hard.
We just don't turn anyone away. Baltimore, we worked hard to build up our chapter, but we have a large number of members who are not journalists. They work just as hard, and if they want to be on the board, outside of the parameters of what NABJ says, I think it's fine. And if you look at the demographics and all of the journalists who are losing their jobs and people who move a lot, it's really, really hard to have a chapter of just journalists these days. It's just unrealistic.
And you have to make people feel welcome, which is why the Pittsburgh chapter was the Pittsburgh Black Media Federation. We never changed the name to Association of Black Journalists, because in that chapter and a lot of other chapters, non-journalists were keeping that chapter running.
Yeah. And I just want to comment that there was a reflection of just what took place in the country. Our print media side, with what happened with our newspapers, they laid off a significant number of people. We needed to make sure that we were inclusive and still allow people who wanted to be a part of us, who lost their job to no fault of their own, to give them an opportunity to continue to be part of the group. So I think it was us being somewhat responsive, but then we felt like we needed to be proactive just by the nature of what was taking place with the industry. So
exactly. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Someone has asked the question, an audience member asked the question, does relieving a chair of duties have to be in the bylaws? It depends on what the bylaws, it depends on how the person was appointed. If the bylaws, depends on how your bylaws are set up. I do know that. Kevin and Benet, you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I'll just say if there's something that prohibits you from doing something, our scenario is that we will bring it before the chapter to amend it, because typically if we identify that there's a problem, and our bylaws had not been touched for a while, so they needed to be updated. And we have a practice that if there's something that needs to be there specific to the question, relieving a chair of duties, and if it's not in the bylaws, then obviously we won't remove them. We'll try the coaching, but invariably we will amend the bylaws to allow it to happen if we feel that strong about it.
And I think if it's a standing committee, then that should be in the bylaws, because the standing committee will say how that chair is appointed. So if it's a standing committee, the bylaw should say how that chair is removed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Benet, do you have a thought on that?
No, we don't have any standing committees, so.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Tim?
It will be a matter of the bylaws to start there to see how they're structured. But usually in most legal settings, the person who appoints or the entity that appoints has the power to remove.
Okay, thank you. Someone in the audience asked the question, how do you prioritize initiatives for your chapter? Membership, programming, fundraising? What should come first, especially if all need bolstering? Who wants to take that? Benet?
The money.
I agree.
We got to keep it 100. I mean, without the money, you're kind of hamstrung. I mean, we have dues, so people pay. I think I'm sorry, I know our dues are $40 a year, very reasonable. And if you pay, you get access to our Facebook group, which is closed. You get access to, anybody can come to our meetings, but you've got to have that money coming in. Then next, you have to have the programming, because people aren't going to come to meetings just to look at each other. So we have set things that we do every year. So for example, we have a woman here in Baltimore who's really good at putting together LinkedIn profiles. She comes every year. We do the Black Male Media Project. We do a holiday party. We do our big career program where we look at reels and clips and portfolios, and then have a real talk management session. So we have things that we do every year, and people expect it, and so that keeps us going.
Yeah. Kevin?
I mean, it's a great question. I'd say realistically, each year we've had to modify the priorities. I agree with, Benet, typically fundraising so that we can meet our operating budgets tend to have kind of a standing priority, but some years are better than others. So it's really not that we need to increase it. We just need to make sure that we're keeping that steady. But I would say typically it's, the membership component. I'm always looking for how do we do well in membership. As I said, the transient nature of our market, we have great people, they get promoted, they have to move to other markets. So we could be rich with membership 1 year, and then 2 years later, I'm sitting here having to start over. So I try to make sure we plan for having a strong pipeline of members that we can rely upon. And it doesn't always work as planned, but usually that membership and fundraising 1 or 2 is there. However, programming leads to strong membership. So they're all kind of intertwined, but, it was a great question. And, the fundraising and membership oscillate between 1 and 2 for us many years.
Thank you.
Can I just throw in one thing? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Tori, I was just going to say that perhaps I'm overreading the question, but it almost presumes that everything is kind of floundering, and what do we start with to try to pick things up? And just building off of what Kevin said, I think it's a matter of the leadership of the organization recognizing who's going to have the talent. And it could well be that someone who is energized about membership, you don't necessarily want to put them in charge of fundraising or put them in charge of bookkeeping. If they are fired up to do membership will drive some of the income. And other people, they want to have big events. Big events can drive membership. And so one feeds into the other, and it's kind of an endless loop. And so it really requires the leaders of the chapter to recognize who's got the juice to get it done, back that winner, and then get everything running. And then year to year, as Kevin was saying, you can dip in and say, okay, this needs a little bolstering or that needs bolstering. But if right now everything is kind of flat and you don't know where to start, don't look at the horse as much as the rider or the jockey and say, Sally is the best person to drive energy.
Okay. Thank you, Tim. I'd like to add something to that. A lot of times when you don't have a lot of people to put on programs, you only have a few people, I think it's best to narrow your focus. So don't try to do every program. Don't try to do 10 things a month. Narrow your focus to like 2 or 3 strong things, 2 or 3 good programs, rather than 15 programs that suck. It's been my experience. You don't have a lot of people. You don't want to burn out the people that you do have volunteering. So maybe narrow your focus on just a few things. Obviously, fundraising is really important, because if you don't have money, you don't have anything. Those are just my thoughts on that. We have another question. April Franklin asked, how do you structure your meeting to attract new members? We are often formal and down to business, and people lose interest. Kevin?
Ours is simple. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Benet. Go ahead, Benet.
Food. I mean, I'm not lying. It's food, but we also have in January, we have our meeting, and it'll be at the end of this month, where we plan out the whole year, and we ask the members, what do you want to see? And they tell us, and then we plan accordingly. So if you have solid programming, every month that you're either going to get some sort of training. We have speakers. We had Jesse Holland, who was formerly with the AP, who came in to talk about AP style. And then we had a session for students to give them the real talk about the world of journalism. So you mix it up, but you have strong programming every month. And so, like for the Black Male Media Project, we have our men plan that whole thing. We step aside and we're there as a backup, but they plan that whole thing. So
thank you, Benet.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say we have meetings, say 2 hours, typically third Saturday of the month for consistency. But if we're having guests, we may ask for the guests to arrive 45 minutes into the meeting or an hour into the meeting to allow us to conduct our business, and then allow for the back half to have not just fun, but for other speakers and things of major interest, because many times we have, things that we have to get addressed, but it's rare that we will have a full meeting with just business topics totally. That's just the way we're structured. So I think most people expect either to have some fun or find interesting topics to do for each of the meetings that we have outside of the cookout and our end of year function.
Because you have monthly board meetings, correct? Or these board conference calls, right?
Yes.
So it's my thought that the heavy lifting, the votes, most of the business should take place during the board meeting or board conference call. So then when you get to your general membership meeting, you might have a little bit of business, like present the report, the financial report, maybe 15 minutes of business, and then tie that into some type of panel, some type of event, something else, because no one's going to go to a meeting and just listen to business for an hour and a half. That's the point of having a board to do that heavy lifting for you. Tim, did you have anything to add? I don't want to exclude you.
No, I that's certainly a technique, and I agree with entirely. Do the heavy lifting behind the scenes. Not that you're trying to exclude anybody, but people don't want to get bored. And I would also just lift up for consideration Benet's wisdom of listening to her members as to what they want, and then designing a program around their desires, as opposed to having a planning committee come up with it out of the blue on their own, and then you're not meeting the needs that may exist out there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Benet, was there a survey when you said you give the members what they want? Do you take a survey online, or you pass out papers for people to vote?
No, we actually do it at our January meeting. This is an election year for us, so we're having elections. The January meeting is our planning meeting. So we will do our business, we'll have our elections, and then everybody will talk about the programming that they want to see in the coming year. And then we go from there.
Thank you. This is another reply to April's question of how do you structure a meeting to attract new members. Another thing if you want to attract members, go off-site. Go to a restaurant and have a mixer. Mixers are a great way to get members because you have your credit card swiper there and you have someone with membership forms, and while people are drinking and partying, that's a good place to get members. It's very successful.
Yeah. Can I ask
yes.
a question? And Alicia's got a great one coming up, but Nate, you said this is an election year, and it made me think of something. We amended our bylaws so we stagger our board positions so that we don't always have a full slate of boards or
That's a good idea.
positions that are being open, so that we try to keep a continuity piece. So, we'll have 2 vice president positions open on, let's say, the even years, the odd years, a president role, and others, because early on we had a very difficult time filling an entire slate of board. And if there's a full turnover, then we have continuity issues. So we amended the bylaws to stagger the board seats so that there's always a continuity, and then there's a rolling horizon of not just continuity, but expertise, so that we can continue on. So I didn't want to lose that thought when you said that, because that was a challenge that we had.
Thank you.
And because membership is so critical to what you all are doing, as an outsider, let me just offer this observation, and that is a lot of the questions and answers have been talking about what your individual chapters do, and there's so much value in comparing and contrasting within your network. I would submit that there is also value to looking outside your network, to be thinking, how else can we connect? Just as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking of all the nonprofits in America, 1.3 million nonprofits, charitable nonprofits, that most of them are small, mid-size at most, but almost all of them will have a newsletter, will have social media, will have other ways, and have particular people who are assigned to those. And I don't think of those people necessarily as full-time journalists, but they certainly are involved in the business of getting information out. And if you can bring them in more into your fold, it helps you all expand and then have a broader influence, as a lot of organizations are really struggling with diversity, equity, inclusion. And this meeting of the minds and the needs of the different organizations could actually help open up a lot of eyes and ears and minds in terms of potential. Now, again, I don't know how strictly you all define journalists. It sounds like, Kevin, you have a little more flexibility there on how you all defined in light of your market changes. Others do differently, but I offer that as a friendly idea of how you can do some outreach just by maybe inviting a couple people from the outside and say, hey, you want to help us examine if we're stuck inside of our little box? How else might we approach the membership issue?
Thank you. It's also, thank you, Tim. For those who joined late, we are taking typed questions. If you hover your mouse at the bottom of the screen and you see chat, type a question there, and I'll present that question to the panel. If you hover where it says Q&A, you can ask a question there, and that's an anonymous question. Someone asked, is it okay to have yearly membership drives and lower the rates? Kevin, do you all do that when you have your membership drives? Did you lower your rates?
Yeah, we have had that. So we have transitioned, but I'll start when we had a January through December cycle. We would have what's called an early bird special, reduce the rate for our membership levels in order to give people incentive to come in. What we transitioned to is we'd have a rolling cycle of memberships, meaning it's automated. So people will sign up. The memberships can be at any point in time. And given and that it's an affordable rate, we've kind of done away with the incentive structure, but we've done it before. It was successful. And we've kind of phased it out over the past 2 years just because $10 meant more to us than it seemingly did to the other people, the members. But it wouldn't hurt to have retained it if we chose. So.
Okay. Benet, do you offer, or Kevin, do you offer any incentives to members to join or to get people to run? For example, I know some chapters, officers are required by NABJ to be members. All of your officers have to be members of the national. And some chapters will pay for their officers' memberships. Is that something that you all do?
No.
Okay.
We have not. I'd say the only thing that we've done along that line is we'll have member only events, using that, membership has privileges kind of framework. So there are things that we've done that we would invite only financial members to. Typically they're marquee type events. And that made it attractive for people to consider joining. And the more we've had, in a year where we may have had 5 of those types of events, membership was strong because we had something that was attractive to the members to do. So this year we're actually talking about how can we do more of those type of events. It does exclude others, but again, there's a benefit
value
to being a member. That's right.
It shows
There's
value.
a value for it. So,
and I've been asked this question before. I believe that every event that has a fee, members should get a discount,
yes.
even if it's $5 or $10. There
Yes.
should always be a difference for the member rate. Some people disagree; they want to get all the money. But if you're a member and you're paying the same thing that everyone else is paying,
then
why become a member?
Right.
Tim, did you want to add anything about membership incentives?
It's just that the trends across the country are across the board, and organizations are constantly experimenting, and there really is no one correct answer other than keep trying and be diligent and humble and bring it in.
Okay, thank you. Franklin asked, what about allies? How do you attract non-Black people to volunteer for a quote unquote Black journalist organization? Benet?
I don't think what we do is when we have our meetings, we try to have our meetings at television, newspaper, and radio stations. So if we're having a meeting at a station, we invite people to come. I think that's about all that we do. Our meetings are open to anyone, so anyone is more than welcome to come.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Kevin?
Yeah, I'd say we have a very open meeting. We don't hold our meetings at those facilities. Either it's at a restaurant or another venue, but rarely will we go on site. But we open it to everyone. We've had diverse membership in the past 4 years, so we've had success. The count isn't large, but we've had it. And in the end, it's how we, position it, that in essence, we're doing good things for the community, great things for the community and for the industry. So there's really a benefit to anyone who chooses to participate, not just if you're Black or African American. So,
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think one way that I have found that works is partnering with other organizations, other media organizations like the Women's Press Club or the Press Club of Pittsburgh, and those members are majority white. And we partnered with the Pittsburgh Black Media Federation. We partnered on several events. And then some of those members joined our federation, and I and some members of the federation joined those groups. And we built those relationships. And then when I needed someone on a panel, they were available, and some of our members would be on their panels and back and forth. It also splits the cost. When you co-host an event and you have to pay for a food or you have to pay for a venue, it helps to partner, you split in the cost of everything, and like everyone benefits. Someone asked, hello, is it fair not to allow a full-time meteorologist to not be a president of the local chapter? I am not sure if that is or isn't considered fair treatment, because in many cases, many meteorologists also have roles and are journalists. Shouldn't that be okay? Also, is it okay for a meteorologist to have a presidential role if they have a degree in communication as well? Well, I know that the Rochester chapter, their president is a meteorologist.
That's what I was going to say, yeah.
Richard McCullough is a meteorologist, and he just was reelected. I don't know how many terms he served, but he was just reelected. I don't think NABJ bars meteorologists from being president.
You just have to check the bylaws.
Yeah, what do your bylaws say?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know, do you all know of any other meteorologists that have been or are chapter presidents?
I don't know personally, but our chapter would not have excluded that individual from being president the way the bylaws are written.
Okay, thank you. I think that was all for the submitted questions at this point. Actually, nope, there's another one. Being that we have student chapters, is it okay to have students as professional chapters? I think they should be as professional members. Is it okay to have students as professional members, and can they be part of leadership? Is it okay to give them a special rate to be part of student and professional chapters?
We do with Baltimore. We have a student rate for BABJ, and we have the professional rate. And we create programming for them. We go to any of the local schools. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be going to Morgan State next month to speak. So we embrace our students. And we have people that actually come from DC to our meetings. So, you know, I don't think having students as in your membership, I think is a very good thing. It helps with continuity, especially if they stay. One of our board members, he graduated from Morgan State, Tremont Lucas, and he's on our board now, and he is our kind of student liaison. So it's been great. I think it's definitely worth it.
Yeah, thank you, Benet. And your bylaws should say, I mean, obviously a student can't be president or vice president unless they're either a full-time journalist or they get most of their income from being a journalist. But your bylaw should say who can run for office, either, and have different categories as far as who can be an officer. But definitely they can be a part of, most chapters I think have a student rate, because a lot of cities don't have student chapters. Okay. Someone asked a question, is it okay for a freelance videographer, photographer to be president? We've answered this a couple times. NABJ requires presidents and vice presidents to be either full-time journalists or get most of their income from journalism. So if the freelance photographer is doing journalism as opposed to like commercial work and gets most of his or her income from journalism, then yes, they can be president. Absolutely.
Well, let me piggyback. Another thing that we make sure is there that they are in full standing as an NABJ member. Mm-hmm. So, obviously as a professional, we're obligated to be financial with National, but it has come up a few times, at least in our chapter, people want roles, but they're not even financial with National.
So for your elections, do you make sure that people, when they're running for office, they have to be a member of NABJ at the time they run for office? Okay.
Yeah. By the time that we're having to vote. So okay. Then that's really it. So if they're expressing their intent, and if there's a 30-day window, then they can in fact be on the slate, but they have to be financial. It's rare that it happens, but we do mandate that it's there.
Okay, thank you. Let's talk about delegating duties. It can be hard for presidents to let go and assign duties to other people. What tips do you have for effective delegation of duties? Tim, I haven't heard from you in a while.
I'm not sure how all the chapters do your officers, whether you have a ladder where you're treasurer, then secretary, then on up, or whether it's separate. And maybe it varies from each one, but we have found it to be successful. I found it successful here in our organization for me to be working with both our board chair and our vice chair, and they are tag teaming, looking at the year ahead when the vice chair will be taking over as the chair. And then I work with my chair, and she helps coach me on things I ought to be taking off my plate and giving to others. I have a tendency to draw things in and keep wanting to play with things, and she recognizes that I can have bigger impact if I let go of some things. And so she's helping to coach me, and having a partner in that is very useful. Just doing it by myself, I'm not successful. So for a board chair to look at who might be coming in as, or the president coming in and who might be filling their slot in a year or two, it might be useful for them to talk about how to divvy things up, not necessarily with that incoming person, but across the whole leadership frame.
Okay, thank you. Benet, how do you delegate duties? Has that been an issue for you?
No, like I said at the beginning, we have a chapter where if you've suggested something and you want to see it done, then you get to step up and actually do it.
Okay, what about Kevin?
Yeah, I concur. I would love to delegate as much as possible. The question is, will I have anyone to delegate it to? But in practice, the only things that we tend to not delegate are things that involve money. So we try to keep strong controls on the money portions of things. Exclusive of that, we do our best to get people involved, whether it's to name them as a committee member, just to get them engaged and other things. But, at least our chapter hasn't been affected by someone that didn't want to relinquish control. We haven't had that as a problem. But if there's individuals out there that are in chapters of that, I think it would just be prudent to have a discussion with the leaders and to talk about that there are people willing to do things, and that it would be great to have a forum where people are given an opportunity to demonstrate that they have capabilities.
Okay, thank you. For those who joined the webinar late, if you want to ask a question, if you hover at the bottom of the screen, hover over chat, you can type a question there and I'll present it to the panelists. If you type your question in Q&A, you can ask your question anonymously. Next, let's talk about the concept of meeting people where they are. I know that some, as president, former president, I found that some chapter members would pay their annual dues but not come to any events but mixers. And you have people who didn't pay any dues, but they were willing to help with programs. How important is that? Is it important to just let it go and go with the help you have? Just move forward with what you have, or just are you more of a stickler about the rules, meaning you haven't paid your dues, you can't participate? How do you handle that?
Benet?
Well, our chapter, we do have dues. We have membership drives, and people are pretty good about paying their dues, but our meetings are open. We are not standing at the door looking to say, are you a member or not? So everybody is welcome at our meetings.
If someone's not a member, can they take on a project? Can they chair a program?
I don't think we've had anybody actually chair a program, but they can help. We're not going to turn down help.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kevin?
Yeah, I concur. They won't chair the program, but they can help and contribute. And typically that leads to them becoming members because they like the engagement with other people. So there are instances where we'll even ask if a non-member can assist with a project just to try to lure them in. So we like the engagement. We don't stand at the door, so all of our meetings are open for individuals. So that is there. It's typically when there are marquee events and socials and mixers where there are cost elements involved. Do we really start to ask if there's a person that's a member, they're discounted for a member, and then others, guests pay, a surcharge or a more full rate for things.
Thank you, Kevin. Tim, can you talk about the concept of meeting people where they are?
Sure. Again, it's going to be a decision made by each organization and group as they go along on what they need. Our view is to do all you can to bring people in and to meet them and to help. And you said something earlier, Tori, about relationships. And you've mentioned it a couple times, and I just want to underscore the importance of relationships and building them. because that's why people will attend the second meeting and the third meeting. And so be cognizant of the importance of those. The other thing that I'm just observing as the outsider here is I hope that you all, by talking about these things and about the chapters, are not thinking that things are different for you or more difficult or challenging or easier. I actually, what you're saying, I'm hearing from all sorts of groups all across the country. And it's all about relationships. And while you're thinking of bringing people in, also be looking at the power of your organization and the ability to identify potential partners that you might want to work with to explore some things, be it the Association of Fundraising Professionals. If raising funds is a challenge, maybe having them come in and you getting involved in some of their things and vice versa, everybody wins. And so think strategically on where you all can build those bridges proactively as opposed to just trying to bring folks in, because once they see you in action, then they're going to want to partake in some of your things too, and everybody then wins.
Thank you. April, speaking of partnerships, April asked the question, have any of you had experience with partnering with other chapters? Benet?
Yes, we, as not as much as we used to, but I mean, I know Donald Walker, who's the president of the Washington chapter. I know Manny, who's president of the Philly chapter, and we're actually talking about doing some work together. I belong to the Philly chapter. I belong to the New York chapter. So, you know, you can make these natural partnerships. We all have friends that are in chapters across the country. I mean, there's no reason why you can't. It's a little easier on the East Coast because everything's kind of squished in. I mean, Tori, I came out to your chapter when you were chapter president in Pittsburgh. So, you know, all you have to, basically, you just have to ask people and think of a program and go from there.
Yeah, and I found this receptive to it. If you know, if you're close, and you're right, DC, Philly, Baltimore, close. Kevin, do you partner with other chapters?
I would say partner is probably a strong word. Under my tenure, we invite our chapters that are in the Carolinas and even Atlanta and Georgia. So we've had members come in for our events, but it's not quote unquote a partnering event. And prior to me, I think it happened more frequently with Charlotte and the Raleigh-Durham chapter and the Winston-Salem, Greensboro. But I would say I don't have firsthand, but it's always something that we put on the docket that we like to at least engage in some extent, typically around fun events.
You said fun events?
Fun type,
Okay.
you know, fun event, bowling or skating or anything like that. So.
Okay.
And Kevin, are you inviting some of the nearby chapters to come to you as well? Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Great.
We do the same thing. We, especially people who are in DC, we always invite them, and people do come from DC. So
it's 7:23, so we have 7 more minutes, but I want to stop just briefly right now and give our panelists, first of all, thank them for their time, donating their time for free and their expertise. I want to give them a time to talk about how they can be reached, plug their book, their website, whatever project they have going on. Miss Benet, how can people reach you?
Oh, I'm easy. It's on Twitter. I'm @QueenBenet, and I also help run the NABJ digital Twitter account. I'm on Facebook. I was the immediate past VP of digital. So I have for NABJ, so I have a Facebook page that I'm maintaining. I also just want to do a quick plug for people for chapters looking for programming. Michelle Johnson and I are both Google trainers, Google Tools trainers, and there's also a similar program for Facebook. We had Facebook come in, Curran Spate came in, and our meeting was packed. This is free. Google flies us to where you are, and we will do these trainings for you. So that's another way to kind of get some programming for free, good programming.
This is what type of, can you talk more about what the training is?
The Google tools is, all the tools like maps and search and earth and images. And then Facebook, it's a mix of Facebook and Instagram, just how journalists can use these tools to enhance their storytelling.
Great.
And communicators like it too, so.
Great, thank you.
Great.
Tim Delaney, how can people reach you?
Probably the best way would be to go to our website, Council of Nonprofits, plural.org, and then you can download all sorts of free materials and gain access to the operational side of running an organization. It's not so much the content for you all, but really just kind of the legal framework and some of the operational issues. We've got a lot of eyeballs on our website, so there's that. Another thing, when you're on that website, I would encourage each of you to see scrolling at the very bottom. It'll say, where's your state association? And you might want to click on that and look about the State Association of Nonprofits in your state, so that you can be connecting with them, learning about some of the things that they are offering. They might have some materials that you think are interesting, and likewise, seeing an opportunity for you to go and be a part of those communities and expand the image and impact of NABJ. But while I've got the floor, two other things. One, I want to praise Tori for her leadership. As she opened, she talked about she had just started this term, and she was listening to people, and she kept hearing that people wanted to talk more about how chapters can be functioning better, and she listened as a leader. I wouldn't say that this is a fun, exciting program, but it's one that many people told her was important, and she listened and she delivered, and so I salute her. The final thing is,
Thanks, Tim.
dear journalists, please know that there is no such thing as a political nonprofit. Please don't write ever political nonprofit. Charitable nonprofits are not allowed by law to engage in any partisan politics. Instead, those groups that are nonpartisan, that are nonprofits and engaging in that, we refer to as non-charitable nonprofits, because they are a different legal designation, and their dark money issues really hurt the rest of us. So just a pointer there.
Okay, thank you, Tim.
Great.
Kevin?
Yes, I put out on the chat my contact information. Most everything is at KR Hirams on social media, LinkedIn, all of that. But really, it's less about me and more about the people that are on the phone here and on video. What I just want to say, this is a rich organization with a rich history. We should be proud of the positions we hold and our responsibility to carry it on. This is a tough time for people in the media as a whole. So it's been great that we've been able to share with one another and do some really positive things internally and in the community. I would just say, everyone on the chat, thank you for listening to us. Great questions today. And it was a privilege to just speak here. So
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your time
you.
tonight. It's 7:29, and that's it. If anyone wants to ask anything, or the panelists want to add anything I didn't bring up, anything we need to discuss, you want to talk about really quickly?
Just thank you.
Yes,
Nope.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. All right. Good night, everyone.
good night.
Good
Bye-bye.
night.
Night.
Right.